It's very nice to welcome my audience into my home, since I can't unfortunately come out of it in order to make music for you. All of us who are performers need an audience, and having had no audience for the last few weeks, and probably not for the next few either, I'm feeling quite bereft, so it's really nice to have a chance to talk to you. And the orchestra have suggested that I talk a bit about conducting, and that's certainly something I'm always very delighted to talk about because it's a fascinating subject. I first conducted the London Mozart Players 50 years ago, so I have worked with that group of marvellous musicians for a very long time. And during the course of that time, I suppose my thoughts about what conducting is and what a conductor does have changed somewhat. And certainly at the early part of my career, having studied with Sir Adrian Boult, who had a most brilliantly conceived stick technique, I used to think the stick was the most important thing and everything else was slightly less important. I think now I've done it for rather a long time, as you can see from the wrinkles. I think there are more skills to conducting than stick technique, and indeed stick technique is very important, but probably not the most important thing. Obviously, you need to know the music you're going to conduct. Equally obviously, it's quite important to make the players feel that what they're doing is worthwhile and that you value them. I've often said that the power of gesture is not just to make things clear, but to make it obvious that you are enjoying the music that the people in front of you are playing, because the conductor is the only musician who doesn't directly make sound. If somebody is playing the oboe and the sound goes slightly sharp, everybody knows it. If the conductor makes an imprecise gesture, the players will probably bail him out by just listening to each other and watching the leader, and most of the audience won't have any idea that he's actually failed to do what he's meant to be doing at that particular point. So I do think that managing the players to the extent that you make them feel that you're valuing them and that what they're doing is worthwhile is one of the best ways to get to a good performance. And clearly, if you don't know the music as well as they do already, that is a very good reason for not standing up in front of them and trying to suggest that they should do things in a particular way. Over time, you do acquire certain understandings, which I think all musicians can acquire without being conductors, about how you space the music, how you let the music breathe, how you give it shape. I have a phrase I use to my City of London choir, very high quality non-professional group, which is if you can't feel the shape, you can't feel the music. Anyway, let's leave the non-technical issues on one side for a moment, indeed possibly for another occasion, and just look at the stick for a second. My stick is unusually long because that's what I was taught by Boult, that you use a high gear, so the movements you have here are not too great, and that obviously if you have a longer stick, less movement creates more movement from the actual point of the stick, which is what you want the musicians in front of you to be following. You can hold the stick in a number of ways. It's very much a matter of opinion. There is no unanimity about this. Boult held the stick with his thumb over the top of the stick, and he had double jointed fingers, so he could make a complete circle 360 degrees without moving the wrist at all. Now, I don't have double jointed fingers and I can't do that quite as well as he could, but nonetheless it is possible to beat without really using the arm at all. Of course, there are many pieces, of which the Verdi Requiem is a conspicuous example, the piece that I hope many of you are going to come to on the 2nd of April, and now I'm afraid you can't, where you need more than very small gestures. And the basic principle is that if it's quiet, you use a very small gesture, and as it gets bigger, you engage different parts of the arm. So for pianissimo, you might simply use the fingers with a tiny bit of wrist to carry you over the bar line. You have to swing the beat slightly over the bar line to keep the rhythmic momentum. And then if you want it to be a bit louder, you might begin to engage the elbow. And then when you want it bigger still, you begin to use the shoulder muscles a bit. And then when you want a huge climax, you come right up in the air and go bang. And I remember seeing Sir Adrian do the Fourth Symphony of Brahms, the first time I ever saw him conduct, which was in what was then called the New Theatre in Oxford. And at the end of the last movement, which is when he wanted the climax to be, and he, of course, had studied this piece with Richter, who had actually conducted the first performance with Brahms in the audience. At the moment he felt the biggest climax had come, he took the stick up over the level of his head, I think for the first time in the evening, and I did think that the roof was going to blow off. Because the thing is, if you scale your gestures so that you have different dynamics, and your different size and movement for each dynamic, the orchestra will respond by playing very loud if you make a much larger gesture than anything you've done so far. Of course, there's a lot more to music than just dynamics, important though they are. And with the stick, you can show the length of the note very clearly. You want a short note, you have a very rapid movement towards the point of the stick and a little click. If you want a legato, you do what Sir Adrian would have called table stroking with the beat. You make the beat and come across from it, and you keep the stick moving all the time in an arc, and that provides a marvellous legato, and that's without using the left hand at all, of course, and the left hand is a whole set of new toolkit for a conductor. But you can show the sort of accents you want in the music by the amount of spring in the beat, or rather more languid beat, which will produce a more legato, gentle effect. And the key point simply is to know exactly why you're doing what you're doing, rather than just beating time as a bandmaster might, just to keep up with the players. The important thing about the conductor is he has all the time to be thinking in front of the sound he wants to hear. So he's 2 or 3 beats in front of what the orchestra is doing in order to be clear that the gesture has time to change what the orchestra actually does. If you do this, you will get a very good downbeat. But you won't get anything between that and the actual preparation because it's too late. It's no good going when you want something, you won't get it because it hasn't got time to arrive in the players' minds. So let's talk a little bit now about the left hand. I think when one begins the conducting process, and with my students certainly, I discourage them from using it for the early stages because you do need to get the work with the stick or with the hand, if you don't want to use a stick, to be very clear on the right hand side. And a quick aside actually, some conductors conduct with their left hand. Paavo Berglund, very fine conductor, but it does generally cause slight confusion initially with an orchestra. So if you've got only a very brief rehearsal pattern, it is more helpful to use the right hand as the basic material. But the left hand has many uses. The most thing it doesn't do, or shouldn't do, is to make what Sir Adrian would have called the Grecian urn, in which you simply mirror what you're doing with the right hand with the left. That just dilutes the focus that the musicians have on the point of the stick, and it does nothing, it doesn't add anything at all. So what can the left hand do? I'm rather against giving cues in an ostentatious way to orchestral players. They very seldom need anything more than a raised eyebrow or a very little small indication, and people who do this are mainly doing it for themselves rather than for the players. And you have to remind yourself that what you want is the eyes of the orchestra and the ears of the audience. So you don't actually want to gesture for the audience's benefit, you gesture only gestures which are useful for the musicians in front of you. So when you use the left hand, there are various things which are really helpful. If, for example, the most extreme example maybe is if you see someone about to come in a bar early or even 2 bars early, this is a universally accepted gesture which I've used all over the world, and no one fails to understand that that means don't play now, please. But beyond that rather peremptory gesture, there are helpful gestures, gestures like, which just keep a sense of extra line if you want it, gestures which punctuate. If you have an offbeat, it's quite helpful to do something with the left hand sometimes. A piece of the Verdi Requiem, which some of you may recognise, would be this, where the bass drum is playing rather aggressively on the 2nd and 4th subdivisions, and you just can help it along a bit with the left hand. You can also do gestures which imply lightness or extra weight, or even sometimes shake the fist for a particularly grand climax. I think all those gestures help, as long as you don't do them too often, and you are beating clearly and helpfully in this hand while doing this kind of thing. So you do need to be able to keep going and be using the left hand in a wholly independent way. If you've got things you'd like to hear about on another video of this kind, do please tweet me on @HilaryConductor with your questions, and I will try to incorporate answers into my next attempt at this. And I'd just like to say to all of you, of course, by definition you're watching this because you love classical, beautiful music and you are interested in the London Mozart players. Remember, these are very difficult times for musicians. If you can help them at all, that's a very, very good thing to do. And I very much hope that you will come to the concerts which have been cancelled, which I hope will only be postponed, and support us. I have one suggestion to make, which is that there's a particularly beautiful disc called The Flowers of the Field, which I had the pleasure of collaborating in with the London Mozart players and the City of London Choir. And among the items on this very beautiful disc, which was basically about the remembrance principle, it was made for remembrance, is a piece called The Shropshire Lad Rhapsody by George Butterworth. And that was the very first piece that I heard Bolt conduct in the concert where he did that fantastic performance of the Fourth Symphony of Brahms. Butterworth was killed in the trenches in 1916 by a sniper's bullet. He destroyed a lot of his music before he went to war, but this piece is a great masterpiece, which thank goodness he didn't destroy. And if you want something to give you a sense of meaning and purpose, I think that particular disc, it's very cheap, it's on Naxos, is one I recommend. The other thing I want to say simply is that I think it's important that we all remember that music has a completely key role. At a time like this, when life is really pretty complicated for lots of people, the beauty and power that music can deliver is such a fantastic unifying force. It unifies the performer with the listener. It makes all of us have a sense of collaboration when we get to listen to it. And I think it should be compulsory therapy for all those people who are having to be confined to their house to listen to at least a Mozart symphony once a week, which makes cows produce more milk and would undeniably also make people's lives happier. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope we shall meet again quite soon. Bye.